So we're continuing to go over section 2 of the Renaissance. The last thing I mentioned in the previous video was the guilds. So hopefully you got that down on your one little a. All right, so let's move on to number 2 on your typed outline. We know that in these Italian city-states, one of the reasons we're going to start seeing them rise in wealth is because of the east to west trade. And remember what that refers to on the map. The east is referring to the Asian part of the world, and the west is referring to Europe. So we see all of this trade coming from Asia flowing into Europe, primarily the Italian peninsula, because remember, the Mediterranean Sea is that hub for a lot of that trade. And so it's easily flowing right into these Italian city-states. So with all of this wealth and money, there is going to be a need for a banking system because you have to be able to protect that money and keep it safe from thieves. We know that the money used at this time is gold and silver, and Florence even minted their own gold coin known as a florin, Florin. In fact, this was the most accepted monetary unit in Europe. So that tells you a lot about Florence's money and their capability to mint these coins. So as a result of all of this trade, Italy, the Italian states, became more urban. So remember, that means a lot more cities and towns are going to grow in population. In fact, more than anywhere else in Europe, we're seeing a major rise in the population of the Italian states. I'll give you a quick little statistic you don't have to write down, but it just proves the point I'm making, that by the year 1500, 7 of the 10 largest cities in Europe were in Italy, the Italian peninsula. So again, that just shows you with all of this trade brings all of this wealth, and so you have so much growth. People are flocking to that area. Easy to understand why. Another image of that map that I have given you reference to. So again, that just shows you how the city-states are operating independently, and we don't have what's called a united Italy. That's not going to happen in Italy until the 1800s. All right, so now we're moving on to the next part of your typed outline. This is still Roman numeral 2, but this is part B, and we're going to focus on each individual city-state and who or what is ruling those city-states. So we're going to start here where the Renaissance originated, which is the Republic of Florence, and this does include Genoa. So we know the Republic of Florence will basically rule, the person in charge will rule both Florence and Genoa. And we know that this is, of course, the center of the Renaissance by the 14th and 15th century. So Florence was ruled at this time by the very powerful and wealthy Medici family. Now, you don't have to know these specific examples of Medici members, but I did give you one here just so you could see an example. But again, I won't ask you about Cosimo. But make sure you make a note for your part B that the Medici family, they were leading bankers and wool merchants. So that just tells us that they were making all of their money from banking and wool. Now, with them being a family in charge, I want you to think back to those terms on the first part of our PowerPoint, the oligarchy or the signori, which is a despot. So with the Medici family, hopefully you're realizing that fits the category of an oligarchy, okay? However, really, if you're going to be technical, Florence is, even though you've got the Medici family in charge, whichever member's in charge is definitely going to be like a signori, a despot. It was set up like this to make it, of course, look like the wealthy are in control, and that gives people security, thinking that not one person is in charge. But in actuality, one person did kind of call the shots. So a little technical there, but I hope you understand what I mean. Another example, you've got Lorenzo the Magnificent. Again, do not write that down, but those are just some examples of Medici rulers. Next, we have the Duchy of Milan, and remember that word duchy just means that there's either a duke or a duchess in charge. And if you're not familiar with the hierarchy of those in charge at this time, you obviously have a king or queen at the top representing the royal family. Then you have a prince or a princess next. And then, of course, you've got the duke or the duchess third in that hierarchy. So the Duchy of Milan was ruled by the Sforza family. So we've got another family in charge of a city-state. So you've got the Medicis in Florence, you've got the Sforzas in Milan. Now, Milan was a major enemy of Florence as well as Venice. They had a lot of business competition going between these three city-states. So what happened was there was concerns over the Ottoman Muslim Turks wanting to take over Constantinople, which was a major capital city in the area of where the Mediterranean is. And so to keep Milan from being taken over by an outside force like the Muslims, they decided to set their differences aside and sign a peace treaty with Florence and Venice. So you can see it's called the Peace of Lodi. It created a 40-year period of relative peace in northern Italy. So again, what those Italian states decided is that they would band together so that they would avoid being taken over by outside forces like the Muslims, because the Muslims were definitely a concern at this time. So remember the Peace of Lodi, very important piece of information. Rome, of course, is within the Papal States, so you can kind of keep those two together when you're studying. And we know that there is always a Pope in charge, because that is the center of the Roman Catholic Church, which if you called yourself a Christian at this time, then you followed the Catholic Church. These popes would serve as religious and political leaders. They controlled much of central Italy. So again, make no mistake, you know who's in charge of the Papal States. And then Venice, which is often referred to as the Venetian Republic, is the longest lasting of all the Italian states. They had the greatest maritime power in Italy, which just means a lot of trade with shipping. So with maritime power, we're talking about the world's great naval and trading power during this time, the Venetian Republic. Now, one thing about Venice, I haven't told you who or what's in charge. It's not on this PowerPoint, so you're going to need to write this down on your outline. The person in charge is referred to as the Doge, D-O-G-E, the Doge. This is the most powerful leader of the Venetian government. So this is definitely going to be a signori or a despot, okay? So make no mistake, a Doge is in charge of the Venetian Republic. And then we finally have Naples, which also includes the kingdom of the two Sicilies. So we're going to put those two together. Only Italian city-state to officially have a king in power. We know that between 1266 and 1435, France did take control over both Naples and the King of Two Sicilies. And then by 1435, Spain is going to gain control of these two city-states. So keep that in mind because that's going to be very important later on. Next, we're going to look at the politics among these Italian city-states. I already mentioned a minute ago that it's pretty obvious a lot of these Italian city-states don't always get along. There's a lot of fierce competition among them, so that is partly why they are not going to be unifying politically. Okay, they very much are operating almost like independent countries with their own rulers and their own politics. The political disunity eventually led to the downfall of these city-states by the late 1400s and early 1500s. So make sure you understand that political disunity is just one factor of what ultimately leads to the downfall of the city-states. It's not the main factor. When we get to part D of your outline where it says decline of the Italian city-states, we're going to go over the main reason for that decline. But this is one particular factor, the political disunity. So what kind of goes along with that are these mercenary generals known as the condottieri. And what these people are, these mercenary generals, they are part of a private army who was hired by city-states for military purposes. So the downside of these particular people is that they tend to not be loyal. They are not reliable because they often go to the highest bidder. So whoever pays them more, that's whose side they're going to fight on. So sometimes you might have one condottieri start with this city-state, and then they kind of get persuaded to switch sides because they're being paid more. So that's why I said they are unreliable. You can't really trust these people at all. In fact, I'll give you an example of one. Remember I mentioned the Sforza family that ruled the Duchy of Milan. Well, one of the Sforzas was actually a condottieri who was hired by the previous family that was in charge of Milan. And so that family hired Sforza, the condottieri, to fight city-state to help keep control over Milan. And what ends up happening in the end is that Sforza member ends up taking over Milan. So again, that just shows you an example that these people are definitely not reliable. They operate kind of on their own free will, and of course they will serve the highest bidder. So you have to look out for these people. You have to remember, last thing about the condottieri being a private army, they don't have government paid professional armies at this time. So men are being hired to fight. Those government paid armies come a little bit later. All right, very important section we're about to go over right here. It's the decline of the Italian city-states. So we are going to see the first time in many years the Italian states are being attacked by outside forces. We have the French invasion in 1494. It's often referred to as the First Italian War. The French king at the time was Charles VIII. This is Roman numeral 8. And so we've got the beginning of foreign invasions of these Italian states. So why is this happening by now in 1494? Very, very important reason. And again, this is the main reason for the decline of the Italian city-states. The fact is, the economy is weakening. And the reason the economy is weakening is because there has been a shift in the trade routes. At this time, all water routes have been discovered. So now, instead of just using the Mediterranean Sea, we have the gigantic Atlantic Ocean now being used by many different countries. So these are all water routes. They had been discovered in the mid-1400s, and that is causing all of this money to leave the Italian peninsula and shift to other directions. All right, I'm going to stop this video so that you can start watching the next one.